Welcome to this afternoon session that we are holding after we have launched. There is some exhaustion in the people. That's quite normal after lunch, but I will try not to bore you. And we'll have a very rapid presentation about an immunological perspective to psychiatric disorders. As you may very well know, in the periphery and in the central neurologic system, the immune system reactions are composed of many cells. And essentially, the common ground of these cells are the excretion of the stoichioin molecules, and in normal conditions, the pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory stoichioins are in a perfect balance, but in the condition of sickness, the pro-inflammatory stoichioins increase. And within the scope of this meeting, we will be talking about this pro-inflammatory stoichioin increase, which is the responsible for many sickness. In the earlier stages of many sicknesses, we see the signals of this, the indicators of this. And in the literature, we call it the sickness behavior. These are the early stage reactions of our body when there is no factor when there is a factor threatening our body enters the body, there is a reaction from the body that is mainly symptoms as exhaustion, tiredness, and dizziness, etc. This is not a disease. This is not a sickness. It's only tiredness. But in detail, we can see that the stoichioins number increasing in the periphery become closer to the central neurological system with cyclohexygenase and arachidonic acid, and microglia cells activated and increases the pro-inflammatory stoichioins. Within the central neurological system, the mitochondria and astrocyte cells have this pathological activation added by the neurons, especially with the increase of glutamate levels, and histotoxicity can accompany this process. Therefore, as the cell groups that support one another, this table becomes more intensified or becomes stronger. The sickness behavior, the increase in the pro-inflammatory cells can be short period, can be short. This is okay because they turn back to normal afterwards. But if the inflammation parameters become chronicle, then we start to talk about some psychiatric diseases. Clinically, a patient who has diagnosed with depression, they have many parameters and a serious activation in their neurological system parameters, and this pro-inflammatory stoichioins number increases, and anti-inflammatory stoichioins, who normally work as opposed to them, decrease, and many cellular dysfunctions and reactive oxygen radicals, these radicals without unliberal electrons increase, and within time glutamatergic neurotoxicity and serotonergical pathways and the neurotoxin metabolites are activated. The only thing that is reduced here is the anti-inflammatory stoichioins. On the other hand, clinically, there is a remission at some times, which shows us the opposite picture. All the parameters that I have counted return to basal values, and the only increasing parameter are the anti-inflammatory stoichioins. So to say, be it hereditary or be it adaptive immune response, the organism has a molecular or cellular components should be included in our focus. I won't count them one by one, but I will talk about some of them. When immune system is activated without any exceptions, all these parameters are showing significant dramatic increases. So, what I would like to tell you is that the changing moods are normally accompanied by a table, by a chart that looks as if an inflammatory table would look like, affecting this peripheral neurological system and working like an on and off switch, and everything changes in accordance with these parameters. In this field, in the recent period, there are lots of studies based on many stockings, though when we measure these stockings, we normally have a specified diagnosis, and the stocking levels are already increased to a certain level. So the studies to determine earlier indicators, I believe the most exciting finding is the pattern recognition receptors, which are in the peripheral macrophage. The macrophage. And these receptors have a basic stimulant, essential stimulant, which could be psychological or physiological stress factors. So to say, the macrophage and microgliomatic cells are modulated by these cells, and with the activation of these cells is normally caused by stress levels. And the pattern recognition receptors are activated, and when they are activated, the toll-like receptors, intracellular, a different type of receptors within the cell are activated as well. I will only touch upon one of them, an NRLP3, not like receptor 3, is the one that I will focus on today, which is the topic of many research as well. So the importance of this receptor, this not like receptor for us, is that when it is activated, the macroglia and macrophage cells have inactive proform stockings, and they are activated by these receptors, and these receptors cause them to be excreted from the cell. So it is one of the very important modulators in the early stage of the sickness. So this receptor, NLR3 receptors and Caspase module are present in this cell as well. So Caspase-1 pathway is activated by these receptors as well. Very interestingly, and maybe naturally, so this pattern recognition receptors are activated when any kind of threat approaches the body. Then the bacteria, viruses, and fungi may activate these receptors. But on the other hand, the sterile activators, we say that they're produced by the body itself, and monosodium urate, for example, or cholesterol or glucose, for example, many endogenous substance can activate these receptors likewise. And as conclusion, when these receptors are activated, interleukin beta, interleukin 18, etc., very strong pro-inflammatory stockings increase, or the cell enters into proptosis. This NLP3 pathway, when it is triggered in the later phases, neurons start to be affected by that, and serotonergic and presynaptic neurons are stimulated by that, and sickness behavior, and if it's chronical, the depression emerges. In the recent periods, this story has been added with another component. The intestines from the peripheral area have been added to that, and in addition to the other mechanisms, the permeability of the intestine membrane and related pro-inflammatory stockings are triggered, and central neurological systems, the permeability of blood and brain, and microglial mechanisms activated in the physiological conditions, the synapses, calcium signal mechanism, the differentiation of microglia, the cognitive functions, the learning and even eating behaviors are affected positively. But when there is a pathology, when these stockings reach to a specific level, and peripheric and central inflammation is triggered within the body, when this happens, they cause almost all psychiatric and neurodegenerative sicknesses. They start this process at least. About depression, the oldest theory is monoamine as you very well know, the serotonin and noradrenaline and the other monoamine structures, neurotransmitters within the synaptic range, they are decreased. And this creates the basic pathology. Then neoendocrine theory was added to that, and corticotropin releasing hormone increase, related cortisol levels increase as well, and caused by that hippocampus neurodegeneration and cortical neural atrophy processes have been added to our knowledge. Neuroinflammation hypothesis was added to that phenomenon in the last years. This microglial activation, hippocampus amygdala cingulatus change because of that, and as the last piece of the story is the glutamate hypothesis. It has bilateral effects. One is extreme increase in glutamate and resulting exotoxicity, and synaptic plasticity change follows that, and the other one is that the modulation of this mechanisms, the rapid effect of antidepressants in the body. I will be touching upon that soon. So, we are aware that microglia cells are important in regulation in the cellular activity, leptogenesis, inflammatory effects, and synapses, self-seeding, and dendritic branching are controlled by these as well, by these physiological characteristics of it as well. This microglia cell, according to its activation, neuroprotection, and neurotoxicity can be provided, can be experienced afterwards. Normally, in this Kesson's stora, this microglia cell, when it is physiologically activated, it may result in anti-inflammatory cytokines excretion, and also many neurotrophic factors are produced afterwards, creating strong connections for the neuron cell and its survival, modulating other functions. But pathologic activations and B-type activations, these pro-inflammatory cytokines are increasing, and the neurotrophic factors are suppressed intensively. This part, maternal immunoactivation trauma and the early stage traumas in this sickness, the environmental pollution, the toxins, the genetical factors, etc. I can't get into detail on that, but when all these factors are increased, these paleostatic mechanisms have experienced a great loss, and this loss triggers sicknesses. Therefore, at this stage, any medication is required that could make a change in this stage, in this phase, because microglia cell with a healthy immune system is the most important communicative cell in the central neurological system, in the central nervous system. This antrocyte and neurodensit cell participation determine the behavioral change in the human body. They become the essential factors. Of course, we have to remember the plasticity at this point, because the immune system's pathological activation may cause negative plasticity as well, because, as you know, the plasticity may create a desirable variety, because we call it the positive plasticity, but in the sickness, the pathologic activation of the immune system causing negative and destructive plasticity. We see it in any level in the body. It could be molecular, cellular, or morphological. In the molecular level, the synapse function and intracellular and signal mechanisms, especially in with the effect of the ketamines effect mechanism, in this pathway, the signal mechanisms are suppressed, and with neurotrophic factors like BDFE are suppressed as well, and glutamate exotoxicity altogether play the fundamental role. In the cellular level, we expressed it with cell loss, neuronal atrophy, and remodeling, and synaptic plasticity, and synaptogenesis. And with the neuropil and structure volumes and neuronal functions, and glial functions and neural network connectivity are among the morphological dimension, let's say. Neuroplasticity is kind of a rewiring, this wiring systems like the neuron, network being restructured and so on. So this strong communication, a healthy communication is impossible to behold with an unhealthy neuronal structure. This dendritic connections must be built very promptly, and it strengthens the communication between cells. The reason I talk about that is to attribute to glutamate and ketamine from here. As you know, the current antidepressants only clinically show their effect after being used for 3 to 4 weeks, because neuroplasticity can only be completed within time, within this framework of time, and neurons can start communicating in a healthy manner. So this ketamine, a glutamate receptor here, NMDA type, shows a miraculous, started a miraculous process. Its basic function is to increase the sodium and calcium levels within the cell, and as they increase in the cell, they create exotoxicity within the cell. And what we know about ketamine is that it is connected to the ion channel of this NMDA receptor and blocks the calcium entry within the cell, therefore rescuing or protecting the cell from exotoxicity. So NMDA blockage creates new synaptic connections within the cell through ERK and ACT and mTOR pathways. This is about increasing the effect of antidepressants, is responsible for rapid BDNF. And this neurotrophic factors is very related to BDFM. They are connected to the receptors, TRKB receptors, and they trigger many signal mechanisms within the cell, the details of which will not be mentioned in my presentation. I don't want to bore you. But they activate these mechanisms, and they facilitate the communication within the cell. Well, this ketamine is an old, drug, but these new developments are kind of a surprise to us. Maybe we have to ask ourselves the NMDA receptors and whether the use of ketamine could be possible with the same results in the same drugs as well. So if we go back to inflammation.
There have been a lot of studies on these drugs, and in 2021, in Nature Reviews, there was an article. I am recommending this to my colleagues who have interest in this area. It is actually something that is really some molecules that are effective on immune system, and it stayed, unfortunately, these molecules stayed at phase 2 and 3. Unfortunately, we couldn't obtain the results that we were looking for. And minocycline, or lower levels or dosages of aspirin, and this is maybe a supporter or enhancing treatments, but with these molecules, either we couldn't get the good results that we were hoping for. There was no significant results, and these research all came to an end. So what is continuing right now? There was an article in Pharmacopsychiatry journal, and clinical trials go, you can see that as of August 22 of 2021, you can see how many of the studies are continuing. I will be touching upon a couple of them. There are phase 2, phase 3 studies, almost completing phase 3, the first example. It is actually the NMDAR antagonism at the focal point. Again, 2B subtype of NMDAR was the subject of another study. Heval, Dr. Heval made a speech about psychedelic molecules today, this morning, and in phase 2 of this study, there are some promising results, some promising molecules and toxins, and there is another molecule that reached phase 3. It is not a novel thing. Serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine triple action is actually being used. Inflammation and neuroplasticity and their very well-built connection was what I tried to explain to you, or at least mention today. But the bad news is that we don't really have a lot of or any agent that could have an effect these problems. Unfortunately, we couldn't find a molecule like that. But I'm hoping that the classical approaches will change in a short amount of time. And thank you very much for your patience.